Welcome, my fellow nocturnal historians. Tonight we begin not with a battlefield charge, but with a quiet winter gate in Manchuria. No guards, no warnings, just a white sign that reads, Epidemic Prevention. Behind it waits a place where footsteps vanish, names dissolve, and numbers breathe longer than people. Trucks arrive at dusk and leave empty before dawn. Villagers hear faint tapping in the vents, like someone knocking from a room that shouldn't exist. Inside, men in spotless coats straighten their collars, adjust their glasses, and begin a nightly ritual disguised as science. This wasn't just a laboratory, it was a world where conscience froze before the body did. Pain was measured, silence recorded, and truth buried under snow and secrecy. If forgotten shadows of history keep you awake, like and subscribe. And tell me, what do you think truly hides behind a gate no one has ever walked out of? Imagine, if you will, the profound silence of a winter night. A silence so deep it feels like the world outside has simply ceased to exist. You are in the back of a truck with no windows. Your journey shrouded in an intentional fog. The rumble of the engine against the frozen ground is the only constant. A rhythmic drone that slowly strips away any sense of direction, any memory of the path you have traveled. You are being driven in darkness, not just of the night, but of a purpose. It's a slow, methodical process, designed to erase the familiar, to ensure that the road you travel becomes an unrecallable blur. Each turn, each jolt, serves to further disorient, leaving you with nothing but the immediate sensation of cold air seeping in through unseen cracks, and the metallic tang of something undefinable. And then, the truck halts. A heavy door grinds open, and a blast of frigid air cuts through the confined space. You step out, perhaps into a dimly lit courtyard, the ground crunchy with ice and packed snow. A new kind of quiet settles around you, a heavier, more oppressive silence than the one you just left. You are no longer just a person. Your identity, your name, the very essence of who you believed yourself to be, begins to recede. Here, in this chilling anonymity, a new beginning is forged, not of birth, but of erasure. A hand reaches out, and a black ink code is pressed or tattooed onto your skin. This mark is not a name, not an identifier that speaks of a life lived, but a cold, numerical designation. You are no longer known by the syllables your loved ones spoke, but by a series of digits, a stark, impersonal label. The staff, moving with a practiced, almost silent efficiency. Do not use the word prisoner. That word carries with it a faint echo of human dignity, of a person constrained against their will. Here, you are not a prisoner. You are a maruta, a term that carries an unsettling weight. It translates to logs. Logs for processing, logs for burning, logs for use. Each morning, in offices where the air is thick with the smell of old paper and stale ink, the daily ritual begins. How many logs were processed today? The question echoes, calm and without inflection. It is a business transaction, a tally of inventory, utterly devoid of human context. You might feel a chill deeper than the Manchurian winter wind, an internal coldness as this new reality sinks in. The very language used here is a weapon, a slow, insistent chipping away at the core of what it means to be alive. And when a person, a log, eventually ceases to function, their number does not retire. It is simply recycled, ready to be assigned to the next body, the next silent arrival. There is no sentimentality, no pause, only efficiency. You might walk through dimly lit, underground corridors, hundreds of yards long. The only sound, the slow, deliberate drip of water from unseen pipes. The air, heavy with the sharp, metallic tang of chemicals and something else you cannot quite name, hangs stagnant. No one comments on the smells, the chill, the profound quiet. Silence is not just a preference here. It is an enforced law, a mandatory state of being. You see small slits in the heavy doors that line these endless passages, and through them, a cold, clinical light leaks out, like the last dying flicker of a candle flame. You understand, with a growing dread, that for many, perhaps even for you, the average lifespan here is measured in mere months, and most, you realize, will never feel the sun on their face or see the open sky again after that first silent night. This place is a world unto itself, a world designed to forget names and remember only numbers. Now, let your mind turn to the man who orchestrated this chilling domain, the architect of this world without conscience. You see him, perhaps in your mind's eye, moving through the sterile corridors, a figure of unsettling calm. Shiro Ishii. He was a man who, it is said, rarely smiled at people. His expressions were often placid, almost detached, yet a faint, almost imperceptible smile might touch his lips, a fleeting curve, when his gaze fell upon a petri dish, upon the microscopic life within. For Ishii, bacteria were not merely subjects of study. They were the future, the ultimate weapon of warfare, an invisible army. And humans, to him, they were nothing more than containers, vessels for the unseen, the expendable. Imagine observing his morning ritual. You might witness him standing before a polished mirror, meticulously straightening the immaculate white coat that was his uniform. A symbol of scientific purity, utterly at odds with the darkness beneath. His hands, steady and precise, would then adjust the spectacles perched upon his nose, the lenses reflecting the cold, fluorescent lights of the facility. With a calm, unwavering hand, he would sign orders, orders that decided fates, that outlined the experiments of the day. There was never a tremor, never a moment of hesitation. His movements were always deliberate, his composure absolute. He possessed an almost spectral quality, moving so silently that his assistants often found him standing behind them, an unannounced presence, their skin prickling with an unexpected chill as they turned to find him there. When Ishii spoke, it was often about the human body, but not in terms of life, or pain, or emotion. He spoke with the dispassionate vocabulary of a mechanic, discussing a faulty engine, dissecting its parts, identifying its weaknesses, and contemplating its utility. Morality, he was fond of saying, his voice perhaps a low, even murmur, is a luxury, and we, here, are too advanced for luxuries. You might feel the weight of those words, the chilling implications. They were not merely spoken, they were a philosophy, a creed that permeated every inch of this complex. His authority was not just absolute, it was a force that compelled even the highest-ranking officers to lower their eyes as he passed. A gesture of deference born not just of rank, but of a profound, unsettling awe. Many, you understand, feared him more deeply than they feared their commanding generals. For his power was not over battalions. but over the very essence of existence. Ishii's vision for Unit 731 was not merely to construct a laboratory in the traditional sense, a place of inquiry and discovery. No. He built it as an entirely new world, a realm intentionally stripped of rules, a place where the stringent ethical boundaries that govern scientific endeavor in civilized society simply ceased to exist. It was a space meticulously crafted to allow science to operate without the burden, or perhaps, as he saw it, the impediment of conscience. You might reflect on the terrifying freedom this afforded him, the unfettered pursuit of knowledge without accountability, without human cost. He was not just a scientist. He was a silent sovereign, ruling over a domain where the quest for knowledge was divorced from humanity itself, leaving only a cold, calculated pursuit of power. Now, allow your mind to expand, to truly grasp the scale of this hidden world. You stand, perhaps, on a quiet rise, looking over what appears to be ordinary Manchurian farmland. Spread out before you, covering an expanse of over 2 square miles, is the Pingfang complex, above ground. It might look deceptively innocuous, a scattering of unremarkable structures, what could be mistaken for simple factories, perhaps some barracks for workers, maybe even lumber mills. The landscape itself is part of the deception, deliberately cultivated to appear utterly ordinary, to blend seamlessly into the quiet, rural surroundings. It is a carefully constructed facade, designed to lull any casual observer into a false sense of security, to deflect suspicion. Yet, you know, or you sense, that beneath this unassuming surface, the true facility breathes. Imagine stepping through a hidden entrance, perhaps a door disguised as a utility shed, and descending into a different realm, below ground. The reality of Unit 731 truly exists. Here, the landscape transforms into a maze of heavy steel doors, their mechanisms humming with a low, mechanical thrum. Red warning lamps cast an eerie glow on thick cement walls. Walls designed not for aesthetics, but for containment, for secrecy, for silence. This subterranean world is a city unto itself, built not for citizens, but for a singular, chilling purpose. You might feel the air grow heavy, cooler, carrying with it a faint, indefinable hum of unseen machinery. The staff, the men and women who worked within this hidden labyrinth, navigated through an intricate network of hidden tunnels. This elaborate system ensured that their faces were never seen by outsiders, their movements never observed. It maintained the illusion of an empty complex above, while below, life, or something akin to it, bustled with chilling efficiency. You might walk through these soundproofed rooms, the air thick, almost viscous, muffling your own footsteps. It's as if you are walking underwater. The outside world a distant, muted dream. This deliberate soundproofing wasn't just for operational efficiency. It was to ensure that no cries, no screams, no sounds of distress could ever breach the thick concrete and steel walls and disturb the meticulously maintained illusion of calm. At the very front entrance, you might notice a structure designed to be a fake visitor center. Its purpose was simple to mislead any foreign inspectors, to present a sanitized, entirely fabricated version of the activities within. It was another layer in the elaborate deception, a carefully placed prop in a grotesque play. Even the medical wing, which might have small windows, had glass so thoroughly frosted that no shapes, no forms. No human outlines were ever visible from the outside. The supply trucks, you might observe, arrived daily. Their contents varied, but always sealed medical crates, large drums of chemicals, and other sealed boxes whose contents no one questioned, or perhaps dared to question. Everything was a part of the system, a piece of the puzzle that was never meant to be fully assembled by an outsider. Even the staff members themselves were not allowed unfettered access. Certain wings, you learn, were strictly forbidden without Ishii's personal signature, his explicit permission. People, in hushed tones, whispered that Unit 731 was not just a complex, but a city, built with a singular, terrifying purpose to erase truth, to bury it under layers of steel, cement, and deliberate secrecy. Before the true brutality could take root, before the chilling experiments could begin, there was an ideology, a foundational logic carefully constructed to prepare the minds of those who would become its instruments. You hear the whispers of this philosophy. Feel its insidious creep into the atmosphere. It began with a simple, yet profoundly dangerous, premise. Japan must rise, and all others must kneel. This was not just a political slogan. It was a deeply ingrained belief, systematically taught and reinforced. The military, the very institution that shaped the minds and wills of its soldiers, drilled into them the notion that Chinese, Koreans, and Russians were not merely enemies, but lesser bodies. Compassion, you learn, was not just discouraged, it was redefined as weakness, a dangerous sentiment that would impede the greater mission. Curiosity, however, was framed as a duty, but a curiosity narrowly focused, directed towards understanding the limits of these lesser bodies. Imagine the endless training sessions, the relentless repetition where soldiers were taught, explicitly, to speak about human beings as units, as mere material. This linguistic shift was not accidental. It was a deliberate act of dehumanization, a psychological conditioning designed to detach emotion from action, to sever the natural human inclination towards empathy. You can almost feel the weight of this indoctrination, the heavy cloak it cast over the minds of those subjected to it. Loyalty to the emperor, you understand, was elevated above every other consideration, trumping all moral boundaries, all ethical qualms. It became the ultimate justification, the unassailable command that superseded any lingering sense of right or wrong. Ishii's chilling philosophy, that a body is just a tool, and tools are meant to be used, spread like a silent contagion through the ranks. It became the unspoken mantra, the foundational principle upon which all subsequent actions were built. The staff, from the highest-ranking officer to the lowliest recruit, learned to mute their emotions, to suppress any flicker of empathy. Empathy, in this environment, was not just undesirable. It became dangerous, a potential vulnerability that could jeopardize the entire operation. New recruits, wide-eyed and perhaps still clinging to vestiges of their former selves, were met with stern warnings. Ask nothing, feel nothing, report everything. This was not merely advice. It was a survival dictum, a blueprint for operating within this morally inverted world. You might imagine the internal struggles some might have faced, the quiet resistance of a human spirit unwilling to be extinguished. But you also know that such resistance, if it ever surfaced, disappeared quickly and quietly, leaving no trace, no ripple on the placid surface of this terrible efficiency. within a matter of months. Ordinary men, perhaps once farmers, shopkeepers, or students, had been systematically transformed. They became not just cogs, but willing operators of a silent, horrifying machine. Their humanity slowly but surely eroded by the relentless logic of dehumanization. The silence of Unit 731 did not remain contained within its walls. Its reach extended, insidiously, into the unsuspecting world beyond the gate. You might imagine, if you close your eyes, the quiet despair that sometimes settled over remote Manchurian villages. Villagers, simple folk living close to the land, would occasionally report strange rain falling from the sky. Not the gentle, life-giving rain they knew, but something unsettling, something that left a residue, a faint, inexplicable unease in the air. This rain, they might whisper, seemed to fall from aircraft overhead, silent as shadows against the dawn sky. You can almost picture it, small clay pots, innocuous in appearance, plummeting from those distant plains, shattering quietly on dirt roadsides, in fields, releasing a silent, unseen payload. Fleas, tiny, almost imperceptible carriers of unseen devastation. Days, perhaps a week, would pass, and then an inexplicable wave of illness would sweep through entire communities. A sudden sickness, its origins a profound mystery, its grip swift and merciless. Families would fall ill, one by one, their strength draining away, their bodies racked with fever and pain. There was no explanation, no visible enemy, only the quiet, creeping fear. From distant hillsides, you might envision figures clad in stark white protective suits, their faces obscured, watching the unfolding tragedy below. These were the researchers, the silent observers of their own grim harvest. With clinical detachment, they would record the casualty counts, meticulously tallying the human cost as if they were counting crops in a field. The numbers grew, becoming statistics in a hidden ledger. Each digit representing a life, a family shattered, a community brought to its knees. And then, another unsettling phenomenon, local wells, once providers of clean, sweet water, would mysteriously turn bitter. No one saw who tampered with them, who introduced the unseen contaminants. Only the lingering, metallic taste of poisoned water. Some towns, you might learn with a growing sense of dread, simply vanished from census records within a single, horrifying month. Their populations decimated, their existence erased as if they had never been. Survivors, scattered and traumatized, would later recall seeing unfamiliar smoke drifting lazily through the rice fields at dawn, a lingering sign of unseen horrors. None of these events, these silent atrocities, were ever acknowledged by any government. They remained unrecorded in official histories, unmourned by the world at large. On maps, you can still find the names of these towns, their locations marked with a quiet certainty. Yet, you understand, for many of them, nothing of their former life, nothing of their people truly remains. They exist as ghost towns on paper, their stories buried in the quiet fields and the memories of the few who survived. A haunting testament to the field tests that no map ever dared to record. Allow your imagination to descend once more, deep into the hidden heart of the facility, where the very laws of nature seem to bend to a chilling will. You feel the profound, unnatural cold that permeates certain halls, a biting chill that seems to cling to your very bones, making the air crackle. Within these specialized chambers, temperature controls were pushed to unnatural extremes, far beyond what the human body was ever meant to endure. Frost, you might observe, formed delicate patterns on metal handles, even as distant fires burned outside the complex, providing a stark contrast to the frigid interior. It was a cold, that bit. A cold that promised a slow, agonizing surrender. Adjacent to these frigid zones, you might discern a low, mechanical groaning emanating from deep within the floors. These were the pressure chambers, their heavy seals containing experiments designed to test the limits of human resilience against crushing force. The sounds were subtle, almost swallowed by the thick walls. But once heard, they were impossible to unhear, a deep, unsettling vibration that resonated through the very structure of the building. Rooms within these halls were not graced with names or descriptive labels. They were identified only by numbers, stark and impersonal. You learn, through hushed whispers, that even the most hardened staff members, those who had long shed their empathy, carefully avoided Room 12 entirely. Their reasons unspoken, their dread palpable. Assistants, moving with a guarded quietness, might be overheard speaking in low tones about faint, rapid knocking sounds. These sounds, they whispered, emanated from behind certain steel doors, a desperate, rhythmic tapping that hinted at something unspeakable within. The precise clinking of thermometers shattering regularly from abrupt, violent swings in temperature, from searing heat to freezing cold, would punctuate the oppressive silence. Each broken instrument was a small, silent testament to the extreme conditions being created and maintained. And through it all, you might envision Ishii himself, observing these experiments with an almost clinical fascination. His gaze, behind his adjusted glasses, was steady, his breath even, as he took meticulous notes. His objective was always the same, chilling in its simplicity to understand how the human body failed. How much cold could it withstand before frostbite claimed its extremities? How much pressure before internal organs ruptured? How long could it endure before its very life force extinguished itself? The answers, derived from unimaginable suffering, were recorded with calm, almost beautiful penmanship, each detail documented carefully, precisely. There were, you understand, with a profound sense of horror, always more numbers to test, always more boundaries to push, in this silent, frigid world, where humanity was merely a variable in a cruel equation. Beyond the immediate horror of the experimental chambers, Unit 731 harbored a grander, even more terrifying vision, and the development of secret weapons that could reshape the very nature of warfare. You sense the ambition, the chilling intellect at play, as you glimpse the theories and proposals that circulated within these clandestine walls. The facility was a crucible for unorthodox ideas, where conventional morality was discarded in favor of devastating innovation. Here, you discover, scientists explored concepts like insect bombs, designed to unleash plagues upon unsuspecting populations. They dreamt of airborne mist, invisible clouds of pathogens that could silently sweep over vast areas, and soil-based toxins, capable of rendering enemy lands barren and deadly for generations. One particularly chilling proposal detailed the logistics of spreading disease via weather balloons. Imagine the silent, drifting spheres, released perhaps from distant points, carried by the wind, only to unleash their deadly payload upon an enemy territory without any visible act of aggression. Another plan, equally insidious, involved contaminating enemy rivers upstream, ensuring that entire populations downstream would succumb to illness before the source was ever detected. The brilliance of these schemes lay in their stealth, their potential to wage war without firing a single bullet, without a declaration of conflict. Files, marked with ominous secrecy, occasionally mentioned something known only as Type O Nebula. Its precise meaning remains shrouded in mystery, a tantalizing and terrifying enigma, hinting at an unknown biological agent or method of delivery, a dark star in the constellation of their destructive designs. Ishii, with his characteristic calm conviction, insisted that biological warfare possessed the power to end wars, not by brute force, but without wasting ammunition. He envisioned a future where invisible armies, silent and relentless, could wipe out entire cities, leaving only devastation and disease in their wake. Military leaders, hungry for any advantage, listened to these proposals with eager attention. You might picture them, their faces grimly illuminated in dimly lit conference rooms, imagining the invisible armies sweeping across vast landscapes, the enemy brought to its knees without a direct confrontation. One particular project, bearing the deceptively poetic name Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, was conceived with the grim goal of targeting San Francisco, a city across the Pacific. The plans for this horrific attack reached their final approval, waiting only for the designated deployment day. A collective breath might have been held, a moment of profound dread hanging in the air. Yet, as fate would have it, the war ended just 1 month before the scheduled attack. If not for that narrow window of time, history books, you reflect with a shiver, would undoubtedly tell a very different, far more devastating story. A story forever etched with the silent horror of what might have been. The chilling calm that permeated Unit 731 was shattered in August 1945. The tide of war had turned decisively, and the specter of defeat loomed large. A single, encrypted order arrived, cutting through the rigid structure of the facility like a cold blade. Destroy all traces. You can almost feel the sudden, frantic energy that gripped the complex, the abrupt shift from meticulous planning to desperate annihilation. The careful, measured pace of years gave way to a frenzied, desperate attempt to erase existence. Imagine the smoke billowing from the furnaces, dark plumes against the Manchurian sky, as staff members worked tirelessly, relentlessly, for 3 days straight. Documents, years of meticulously recorded data, chilling findings, and the very blueprints of human suffering were fed into the hungry flames. The air would have been thick with the smell of burning paper, the acrid scent of incinerated truth. Records that could not be consumed by fire, perhaps too voluminous or too resilient, were hurriedly gathered and buried in deep lime pits behind the complex, meant to dissolve into anonymity, their secrets eaten away by the corrosive earth. And then, the logs, the prisoners, the countless individuals who had lost their names and become numbers. They vanished completely. You try to picture their final moments, the desperate hope or quiet despair. None were ever accounted for. Their disappearance absolute, their stories swallowed by the frantic rush to eliminate all witnesses. Machinery, the tools of their grim trade, was systematically smashed, rendered useless, its metallic groans replaced by the jarring sounds of destruction. Glass, from test tubes to observation windows, was melted down, losing its form and its ability to reflect light, becoming a molten testament to obliteration. Heavy doors, once a symbol of the facility's secrecy, were sealed shut with concrete, creating tombs of knowledge, impenetrable barriers to the truth. Ishii himself, the architect of this dark empire, did not face the music. He fled, disappearing back to Japan, adopting a civilian disguise, shedding his identity as easily as his victims had shed theirs. When Soviet troops, victorious and relentless, finally arrived at the gate that no one ever walked out of, they found only ashes and silence, an eerie, profound quiet that spoke volumes of what had transpired. What remained were fragmented clues, scattered bones, mute witnesses to unspeakable acts, notebooks hastily abandoned, their pages filled with chilling observations, and fragments of sealed reports torn and discarded, yet still hinting at the terrible truths they once contained. Enough, you realize, to suggest the horror, but not enough to fully expose every single detail, every name, every act. The most chilling part of all, the most haunting truth, is that no survivor ever walked out of that gate to tell their story, to bear witness. Their voices, their experiences, were extinguished, leaving only the echoes of a place that should never have existed. The fires eventually died down, the smoke cleared, and the silence of Unit 731 settled into a different kind of quiet. The silence of a secret successfully buried. But some truths, even when immolated, leave embers that glow for decades. You follow these faint glows through the post-war years, a period of reconstruction and suppressed memory. American investigators, seeking advantage in the nascent Cold War, arrived on the scene. They interrogated the surviving staff members, the very individuals who had participated in the unspeakable experiments. Yet, instead of justice, an unthinkable exchange occurred. Immunity from prosecution was offered in return for the invaluable data, the scientific findings extracted from human suffering. The cost of this Faustian bargain was immense. Trading accountability for knowledge. Shiro Ishii, the man who had overseen this realm of horrors, lived out his days in quiet anonymity until 1959. He never faced a trial, never accounted for his actions. He simply faded into the shadows, his presence a ghost in the collective consciousness. Many of his former collaborators, those who had operated the silent machine, went on to live seemingly normal lives. You might track their trajectories. Some became respected doctors, their hands once engaged in unthinkable experiments, now perhaps healing. Others became esteemed professors, teaching in universities, their minds once focused on destructive innovation, now shaping young minds. Some even ascended to positions as public officials, holding power and influence, their past deeds buried under layers of officialdom. During the 1950s and 60s, a decade or two after the war's end, some of these former members even held reunions, openly gathering, perhaps reminiscing, their shared past a bond rather than a burden. For decades, the official stance of Japan was one of outright denial. The facility, they claimed, never existed. It was a fabrication, a rumor, a ghost story. But truth, has a stubborn way of surfacing, even when buried deep. In the 1980s, dedicated historians, driven by an unyielding quest for clarity, slowly began to uncover the immunity deal struck by General MacArthur, a pivotal moment that exposed the extent of the cover-up. Slowly, painstakingly, documentaries emerged, shedding light on the darkness, confessions, reluctant at first, then more forthcoming, surfaced piece by piece like fragments of a shattered mirror, reflecting the grim reality. Families of the victims, those who had disappeared into the maw of Unit 731, continued their agonizing search for acknowledgement and answers. Their pleas, once unheard, slowly began to resonate. Finally, in 2018, decades after the fact, Japan officially released 3,607 names of personnel associated with the unit. It was a partial unveiling, a crack in the wall of silence, but a significant one nonetheless. Unit 731, you reflect, leaves us with one final, haunting lesson when truth is allowed to sleep for too long. Forgotten and unaddressed, it does not simply vanish. Instead, it awakens, slowly and inexorably, as a profound, chilling warning, its silent echoes reverberating through the corridors of history, urging us to remember, lest we ever allow such darkness to take root again. As the final names were released, and the echoes of Unit 731 reverberated into the modern era, you are left to ponder the enduring nature of such a place. The quiet winter gate in Manchuria, once marked only by the simple sign of epidemic prevention, stands now, perhaps as a weathered ruin or a reconstructed memorial. Yet its original purpose remains etched in the historical landscape. The snow still settles on the metal roofs, but now it seems to carry the weight of untold stories, of lives that dissolved into numbers and then into dust. The faint tapping in the vents, once a source of terror, might now be heard as a whisper from the past, a silent plea for remembrance. You can almost feel the chill of those underground corridors, the smell of chemicals and iron clinging to the memory, a haunting perfume that refuses to dissipate. The image of men in spotless coats, adjusting their glasses before beginning their nightly rituals disguised as science, remains a stark, unsettling tableau. It is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge, when divorced from conscience, can lead to the darkest abysses of human cruelty. The logic of dehumanization, the idea that a body is merely a tool, continues to resonate as a cautionary tale, a lesson in how easily empathy can be muted, and how quickly ordinary men can become operators of a silent, horrifying machine. The field tests, unspoken and unrecorded on any official map, live on in the collective memory of the few who survived, and in the historical documents that have slowly surfaced. The strange rain, the poisoned wells, the vanished towns. These are not just events, but symbols of a world where human life was deemed utterly expendable. The cold, the pressure, and the silence of the experimental rooms serve as a chilling testament to the methodical search for human failure, conducted with an unwavering, clinical gaze. And the secret weapons, the dark theories that once threatened to unleash unimaginable devastation upon distant cities, remind us of the fragile line between scientific advancement and existential threat. The fires that erased evidence, the frantic destruction, and the ultimate disappearance of those labeled logs are a stark reminder of the lengths to which secrecy and denial can go. Yet, Despite the calculated efforts to bury the truth, the post-war ghosts of Unit 731 continue to drift through time, demanding attention. The immunity deals, the quiet lives of perpetrators, the decades of denial, and the slow, agonizing emergence of facts. These tell a story not just of historical horror, but of moral complicity and the persistent struggle for justice. And so, you return to the image of that quiet gate. No longer just a physical boundary, but a symbolic portal into a deeply unsettling chapter of human history. It stands as a stark monument, a silent warning that when truth is left asleep for too long, covered by snow and secrecy, it will eventually awaken. And when it does, it awakens not as a gentle remembrance, but as a chilling, undeniable warning. Its presence reminding us that the deepest shadows are often cast by the human heart when it forgets its humanity. And perhaps, as you ponder this, you might hear, just faintly, the echo of footsteps that vanished, names that dissolved, and numbers that breathed longer than people, reminding us to always look and to always remember. The truths hidden behind the gates no one was ever meant to walk out of. Hey guys, as the world outside softly dims and the quiet of night descends, perhaps you're settling in with a warm, comforting drink beside you. I invite you now to join me on a profound, albeit sobering, voyage back in time. Tonight, we journey to the tranquil, yet rigidly structured, landscapes of late 19th century Japan. We'll embark on a story that begins subtly, amidst rustling rice fields and ancient customs, but ultimately unfolds into one of the darkest, most unsettling chapters of human history. This is the chilling tale of Shiro Ishii and the vast, enduring shadows he cast. While popular narratives often paint historical figures, especially those associated with great darkness, in broad, dramatic strokes, the truth is frequently far more nuanced and complex. It emerges from quiet villages, brilliant minds, and the slow erosion of moral boundaries. Before we truly begin our gentle descent into these annals, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet joy, a small comfort, to feel our community gather from across the globe, united by a shared curiosity for the past, even its most difficult passages. And if you find solace and intrigue in these tranquil explorations of yesteryear, if the gentle rhythm of historical discovery aids your winding down, then consider offering a quiet like and perhaps subscribing to the channel so you never miss another journey into the hidden corners of history. Now, dim the lights. Make yourself utterly comfortable. Perhaps adjust your pillow just so, allowing your body to relax completely. Let's ease into tonight's story, allowing the gentle rhythm of discovery to guide us as we explore the life and legacy of a figure whose very name whispers of forgotten horrors. Our story begins in a time now distant, within the serene, almost untouched landscape of late 19th century Japan. Picture, if you will, the small village of Chiyotamura, nestled amidst undulating fields of emerald green rice paddies. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blossoming cherry trees, often carried the quiet hum of diligent labor. Life here, as in countless other hamlets across the archipelago, moved with the measured pace of the seasons, dictated by the ancient rhythms of agriculture. Small wooden homes with paper screens dotted the landscape, their roofs often thatched, smoke curling lazily from their hearths into the crisp morning air. The primary industry, beyond the sustenance of the land itself, was the meticulous craft of brewing rice wine, or sake, a liquid art form that permeated the culture and economy of the region. Yet, beneath this veneer of pastoral tranquility, a deeply ingrained social order persisted, defined by rigid class lines as unyielding as the surrounding mountains. It was into this world, both beautiful and starkly stratified, that Shiro Ishii was born. His family, though not part of the highest echelons of the imperial court or the most powerful samurai clans, belonged to a tier of minor nobility. This status afforded them significant influence and a comfortable existence, especially within their local community. Shiro was the son of Katsuya Ishii, a man of considerable means, who not only held vast tracts of fertile land, but also oversaw a thriving sake manufacturing enterprise. Their wealth wasn't merely accumulated. It was a living, breathing entity, constantly replenished by the tribute paid by the peasant farmers who toiled on their land, and by the steady, lucrative sales of their renowned rice wine. The Ishii household itself was a silent testament to this prosperity and status. It was a sprawling estate, far grander than the humble dwellings of their neighbors, characterized by its carefully manicured gardens, meticulously crafted wooden interiors, and the quiet, almost invisible presence of servants. In this home, money and social standing didn't need to be loudly asserted. They simply existed, a foundational truth that permeated every interaction, every decision. The rustle of expensive kimonos, the hushed tones of command, the deferential bows of those who served. These were the subtle indicators of a world where hierarchy was paramount. Intriguingly, almost nothing concrete is known about Shiro Ishii's mother. Her name, if ever widely recorded, seems to have faded from the historical annals, an almost eerie emptiness that surrounds his earliest years. This absence, this lack of maternal presence in the narrative, adds a layer of quiet mystery to his formative experiences, leaving one to ponder the unspoken influences or emotional voids that might have shaped a young mind within such a rigid, patriarchal environment. Perhaps it contributed to a certain emotional detachment, an early lesson in the impermanence of personal connections within a world focused on status and power. From the very dawn of his consciousness, Shiro Ishii was subtly, yet profoundly indoctrinated into the belief that he stood inherently above the common villagers. This wasn't a lesson delivered in explicit, boisterous declarations, but rather absorbed through daily observation, through the very fabric of his existence. The class hierarchy wasn't merely a social construct. It was presented and understood as a natural law, as immutable and self-evident as the changing seasons or the flow of the local river. He witnessed servants attending to his every need, their lives seemingly dedicated to the comfort and convenience of his family. He observed the stark difference in their attire, their demeanor, their prospects. Through these constant, unspoken lessons, a fundamental fracture began to form in how he perceived humanity itself. There were those, like himself, who were born to command, to innovate, to lead. And then there were the others, a vast, undifferentiated mass, whose purpose was to obey, to serve, to facilitate the ambitions of those above them. This early, deeply ingrained division would, in time, bear catastrophic fruit. The village, with its quiet fields and ancient traditions, was the crucible in which the seeds of a chilling detachment were first sown, gently, almost imperceptibly, preparing the soil for what was to come. As Shiro Ishii transitioned from boyhood into his formative years, the seemingly placid landscape of Japan was, in fact, undergoing a seismic transformation. His youth coincided with the profound aftershocks of the Meiji Restoration, an era that had fundamentally reshaped the nation's destiny. The centuries-old rule of the shogunates, with their feudal domains and decentralized power, had been swept away, dissolving into the historical mists. In their place, the emperor, once a largely ceremonial figurehead, had been re-established as the supreme spiritual and political authority, a living symbol around whom a new, unified national identity was forged. This was more than a mere change in governance. It was a profound ideological shift, akin to the reawakening of a sleeping giant. Shaking off centuries of isolation and internal strife, Japan, with an almost breathtaking speed and determination, plunged headlong into a fervent drive to modernize. This wasn't a simple imitation of the West, but a unique, almost alchemical fusion. Western technology and industrial prowess were enthusiastically adopted, yet meticulously interwoven with deeply traditional Japanese discipline, unwavering loyalty, and a profound sense of national purpose. Factories rose alongside ancient temples. Steamships navigated waters once plied by wooden fishing boats, and telegraph lines began to crisscross the mountainous terrain. Central to this modernization was the rapid and formidable expansion of both the Army and Navy. Japan recognized, with stark clarity, that to stand among the great powers of the world, it needed a military capable of projecting its newfound strength. For young Ishii, growing up against this backdrop of surging national pride and military ambition, a pivotal moment arrived with the stunning victory over Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. This wasn't just another conflict. It was an unprecedented triumph of an Asian power over a major European empire, sending shockwaves across the globe. For Ishii and an entire generation of Japanese youth, this victory served as potent, irrefutable confirmation. Japan was not merely a rising power, but a nation destined for true greatness, an empire in the making. The victory resonated with a visceral, almost spiritual significance, cementing a belief in Japan's inherent superiority and unique place in the world. In the wake of such a momentous affirmation, nationalism and emperor worship swelled into something far beyond mere patriotism. It became a quasi-religious fervor. Loyalty to the state and to the emperor as its divine embodiment transformed into an absolute moral principle, an unassailable virtue. Every aspect of society, from the grand pronouncements of government to the quiet lessons taught in schoolhouses, reinforced this singular message. Children, like Ishii, were immersed in an ideology that lauded Japanese superiority, its cultural heritage, its martial spirit, its perceived racial purity. They were taught of Japan's sacred mission to lead Asia, to cast off Western imperial influence, and to fulfill its inherent destiny as the dominant force in the Pacific. Shiro Ishii, with his keen intellect and already established sense of personal superiority, internalized this pervasive ideology completely and without question. For him, the grand narrative of Japanese manifest destiny wasn't an abstract political concept. It became an unshakable truth, the very lens through which he viewed the world. In this framework, any nation, any people, any obstacle that stood in the path of the empire's expansion or the realization of its destiny was not to be seen as a fellow human entity with its own rights or aspirations. Instead, they were mere impediments, obstacles to be efficiently and dispassionately removed. The seeds of detachment, sown in the quiet village, found fertile ground in the burgeoning fanaticism of a nation convinced of its own divine right. The collective fervor of a rising empire thus helped to cement a personal philosophy that would ultimately lead to unimaginable atrocities, quietly affirming the notion that certain lives held less value when weighed against the perceived glory of the state. Shiro Ishii's intellectual capabilities truly began to blossom and make themselves undeniably apparent during his academic years. His mind, sharp and incisive, proved exceptionally adept at absorbing and retaining information. He didn't just study, he devoured knowledge, reportedly memorizing entire books with a facility that astonished his peers and instructors alike. Teachers, recognizing a rare and formidable intellect, showered him with praise for his extraordinary intelligence and his intense, almost obsessive focus. This wasn't merely a diligent student. This was a young man with a powerful, almost predatory, intellectual hunger, driven by an inner ambition that simmered beneath a calm exterior. His academic brilliance was eventually rewarded with an opportunity that most could only dream of: a coveted place at the elite Kyoto Imperial University to study medicine. This was an achievement of immense distinction, a gateway to the highest echelons of Japanese society, a feat that even many born into nobility rarely attained. Kyoto Imperial was not merely a university. It was a crucible for the nation's future leaders, scientists, and thinkers. Within its hallowed halls, surrounded by some of the brightest minds of the era, Ishii distinguished himself further. Professors, quick to identify his exceptional talent, actively sought him out, drawing him into their most advanced research projects. He was granted early privileged access to cutting-edge laboratory work, an invaluable experience that allowed him to hone his scientific acumen and develop a deep understanding of experimental methodology, even before his formal training was complete. Yet, this intellectual prowess was twinned with a character trait that fellow students observed with a mixture of awe and unease, an almost boundless ambition. His interactions, even those that seemed friendly, often felt transactional, as if every relationship was a calculated step on a personal ladder leading ever higher. He cultivated connections not for camaraderie, but for strategic advantage, seeing people as potential resources in his relentless ascent. This detached, utilitarian approach to human connection marked him as different, setting him apart from the more conventional student seeking genuine companionship. Outside the rigorous confines of the laboratory and lecture halls, Ishii's life took on a dramatically different, almost notorious character. He was known for his heavy drinking, indulging in the vibrant, often illicit, nightlife of Tokyo's pleasure districts. Brothels, lavish parties, and a general air of wild abandon became hallmarks of his off-campus existence, all financed by the substantial wealth of his family. This dual existence, the disciplined, brilliant scientist by day and the dissolute playboy by night, painted a complex portrait of a young man who seemed to compartmentalize his life with an unnerving ease. his personal excesses seemingly having no impact on his academic rigor. Perhaps most tellingly, Ishii actively cultivated relationships with the university elite, bypassing normal decorum and social barriers. He displayed a bold, almost audacious, willingness to engage directly with powerful figures, most notably President Torasaburo Araki, the esteemed head of Kyoto Imperial University. This was not typical behavior for a student. It was a deliberate strategy to forge alliances with those at the pinnacle of power and influence. His ultimate masterstroke in this regard occurred in 1920 when he married Araki's daughter, Kyoto. This union was more than a personal commitment. It was a powerful, meticulously calculated alliance. It seamlessly intertwined his already considerable ambition with the established status and scientific authority embodied by Araki, cementing his position within a network of influence that would prove instrumental in his future. Darker endeavors. The brilliant student of Kyoto, thus, was not merely acquiring knowledge. He was meticulously constructing a foundation of power, a platform from which his chilling vision would later take flight. Upon the successful completion of his demanding medical studies, Shiro Ishii stood at a crossroads that many of his peers would have navigated towards a lucrative private practice, a life of comfort and respected service in civilian hospitals. But Ishii, with his eyes fixed firmly on a different horizon, chose another path entirely. He opted not for the quiet life of a general practitioner, but for the disciplined, hierarchical world of the army, envisioning himself as an officer-doctor, serving the burgeoning empire he so passionately believed in. This choice was indicative of a deeper alignment with the militaristic spirit of the age and his own burgeoning ambition to play a role on a grander, national stage. His initial posting as a first lieutenant at Tokyo's Army First Hospital immersed him in the stark realities of military medicine and the intricate bureaucracy that underpinned it. Here, he learned not only the practicalities of treating soldiers and managing medical crises, but also the rhythms of command, compliance, and institutional operations. This experience, though seemingly conventional, provided him with invaluable insights into the inner workings of the military apparatus, knowledge that would later serve his more sinister aims. It was a period of consolidation, where his surgical skills were refined and his understanding of organizational power deepened. Driven by an insatiable intellectual curiosity and a desire for specialized knowledge, Ishii soon returned to academia. Not as a student this time, but as a researcher pursuing a doctorate. His focus sharpened dramatically, gravitating towards the invisible, microscopic universe of pathogens. He delved deep into the complexities of blood sera, bacteriology, and human pathology, seeking to understand the fundamental mechanisms of disease, microbes, these tiny harbingers of sickness and death, became his universe, a field of study that offered both intellectual challenge and, as he would soon realize, immense destructive potential. An opportunity to prove his expertise, and perhaps to gain a measure of public recognition, arose during a deadly encephalitis outbreak on the island of Shikoku. With his specialized knowledge, Ishii was able to identify and isolate the causative virus, a critical scientific breakthrough that helped to stem the tide of the epidemic and earned him considerable fame within medical and military circles. This achievement not only solidified his reputation as a brilliant scientist, but also reinforced his personal belief in the power of his intellect to conquer complex problems, even those involving invisible threats. By 1927, Shiro Ishii had successfully earned his PhD in microbiology, a testament to his relentless dedication. His academic contributions included co-authoring research on fever-induced treatments for gonorrhea, showcasing his versatility and expertise in both theoretical and applied microbiology. He was, by all accounts, a rising star in the medical scientific community. Then, one day, a seemingly innocuous piece of information intersected with his burgeoning intellectual trajectory, forever altering his path and, tragically, the course of history for countless innocent lives. He read about the 1925 Geneva Convention, an international treaty specifically banning the use of biological warfare. For most, this convention represented a moral line, a collective international agreement to prevent unimaginable suffering. But for Ishii, it was not a moral warning. It was a strategic clue, a flash of sinister insight. The very existence of such a ban, the intense international effort to prohibit these weapons, suggested something profound to his calculating mind. If the world feared these biological agents to such an extent, if they were deemed too horrific for conventional warfare, then they must possess an unparalleled, fearsome power. To Ishii, the ban wasn't a barrier to be respected. It was a testament to the untapped potential of disease as a weapon. He began, quietly at first, to argue within military circles that Japan must disregard this treaty. His conviction grew that the empire needed to proactively develop these super germs, not merely for defense, but as an offensive tool, a means to terrorize its enemies into submission, ensuring Japan's dominance in a world he perceived as increasingly hostile. This was his origin moment, the insidious birth of a vision that would unleash unspeakable horrors. Shiro Ishii's increasingly vocal obsession with biological weapons was, at first, met with skepticism, perhaps even outright dismissal, by many within the traditional military establishment. Such concepts were radical, seemingly fantastical, and certainly a departure from conventional strategic thinking. Yet, Ishii, undeterred by initial resistance, possessed an almost zealous conviction. He refused to be silenced, transforming himself into a tireless and increasingly persuasive advocate for germ warfare within influential military circles. His arguments, delivered with intellectual rigor and a chilling pragmatism, slowly began to find traction among those who were already inclined towards more aggressive and unconventional strategies. To bolster his claims and gather essential intelligence, Ishii embarked on an ambitious 2-year world tour in the late 1920s. This wasn't a leisure trip. It was a clandestine intelligence-gathering mission of paramount importance. His itinerary was extensive, spanning across the major powers of Europe, venturing into the enigmatic Soviet Union, meticulously observing British colonial administrations, and even exploring scientific establishments within the United States. At each stop, with a methodical precision that belied his true intentions, he sought out leading scientists, medical researchers, and military strategists. He engaged them in what appeared to be innocent academic discussions, asking probing questions designed to elicit every scrap of information concerning germ warfare, its theoretical underpinnings, and any potential research or defensive measures being undertaken by these nations. He was a sponge, soaking up knowledge, techniques, and whispers of unconfirmed developments. always with a singular, chilling purpose. Upon his return to Japan in 1930, Ishii was armed with a profound and, for him, deeply validating conviction. He had seen enough, heard enough, and deduced enough to believe with certainty that other nations were indeed exploring the dark possibilities of biowarfare, perhaps covertly. To his mind, this wasn't a threat to be averted through diplomacy, but a race to be won. He concluded, with a cold logic that disregarded ethics entirely, that Japan not only could develop these weapons, but must race ahead to ensure its survival and to secure its rightful place as a dominant power. Crucially, his return coincided with a significant shift in the political landscape of Tokyo. The moderate voices that might have tempered such radical proposals were being increasingly sidelined. New, aggressive leaders were rising to power, men characterized by their fervent imperial ambitions and a distinct lack of concern for international ethics or moral conventions. These were individuals who envisioned a vast Japanese empire stretching across Asia and the Pacific, and they were willing to employ any means necessary to achieve it. It was to these receptive ears that Ishii pitched his chilling vision. He presented germ warfare not just as a powerful weapon, but as an economically viable one, cheap to produce, devastatingly effective, and capable of sowing widespread terror and chaos. In a world still reeling from the devastating economic impact of the Great Depression, the idea of a poor man's atomic bomb, a weapon that could cripple an enemy without the immense material cost of conventional armies, held a perverse appeal. His arguments resonated deeply with figures such as War Minister Sadao Araki, a staunch nationalist, and other powerful, influential militarists like Tetsuan Nagata and Chikahiko Koizumi. These men, recognizing the strategic potential and aligning it with their expansionist goals, through their considerable backing behind Ishii. With this newfound political support and the securing of substantial funding, Ishii's career skyrocketed. He was swiftly promoted to the rank of major and appointed to the prestigious position of chair of immunology at Tokyo Army Medical College. This was more than just a title. It was a critical platform, granting him the resources, the legitimacy, and the institutional cover he needed to transform his terrifying ideas from whispered theory into a chillingly concrete reality. The pieces were now in place, the machinery for a future death factory, conceived in the mind of a brilliant, amoral scientist, was slowly, meticulously being assembled. With the backing of powerful military figures and a newly secured stream of funding, Major Shiro Ishii was finally granted the autonomy and resources to begin transforming his insidious theories into practice. His laboratories, no longer constrained by the pretense of purely defensive research, shifted their focus entirely. The target was clear to cultivate, weaponize, and master the deadliest microscopic agents known to humanity. Plague, cholera, typhoid, anthrax. These names, once associated with natural catastrophes, were now meticulously studied, cultured, and engineered to become instruments of deliberate destruction. Death, in its most invisible and pervasive form, was being meticulously refined. Initial stages of this research were carefully framed within official military communications as defensive in nature, ostensibly aimed at vaccine development and preventing outbreaks among Japanese troops. This public facade provided a crucial layer of plausible deniability. However, beneath this thin veil, Ishii quietly, persistently began to press for the necessity of human test subjects. He argued, with chilling logic, that understanding the true efficacy and pathology of these weaponized diseases required direct observation on living human organisms. The ethical abyss that this proposal represented was, for Ishii and his powerful patrons, not an impediment, but a logical step. Meanwhile, a parallel geopolitical development provided the perfect, tragic context for Ishii's demands. Japan had aggressively invaded Manchuria in 1931, establishing a brutal colonial regime that treated the vast Chinese population as inherently inferior and utterly expendable. Chinese lives, stripped of their inherent worth by the occupiers, became tragically cheap in the eyes of the imperial forces. This dehumanization created the ideal moral vacuum for Ishii's experiments to proceed unchecked. In 1932, Ishii received the authorization and funding he needed to establish his first dedicated bioweapons facility. Initially, it was a makeshift operation. Housed within an old sake brewery near the city of Harbin in occupied Manchuria. The irony was palpable, a place once dedicated to the creation of traditional Japanese spirits, now silently converted into a site for generating death. But this humble beginning was quickly deemed insufficient for the scale of Ishii's ambitions. He soon demanded something far grander, more secure, and crucially, more remote. His vision was realized in the construction of Zhongma Fortress, nestled deep within the desolate landscape of Beiying. This was no ordinary military outpost. It was a purpose-built complex, meticulously designed to be both a laboratory and a prison. Shrouded in absolute secrecy, tall watchtowers piercing the vast sky, fortified walls, and a network of heavily armed guards ensured its total isolation from the outside world. The very air around Zhongma was thick with an unspoken dread, a place where the wind whispered only of suffering. Into this hidden hell, sealed trains began to arrive, their cargo not supplies, but human beings, political prisoners, captured resistance fighters, and common criminals, often rounded up arbitrarily, were funneled into the fortress. Locals in the distant villages spoke in hushed tones of these arrivals, of strange convoys, and of distant, unsettling screams carried on the night wind rumors that hinted at unspeakable horrors within. Inside, these prisoners, often healthy young men, were shackled in rows of cells, their futures abruptly and violently terminated. They were kept surprisingly well fed, not out of any sense of compassion, but purely for scientific reasons. Their bodies needed to be ideal for infection, strong enough to provide clear, uncontaminated data on the progression of disease. And so, the experiments began. Glanders, anthrax, typhoid, smallpox, dysentery, bubonic plague. A horrifying litany of diseases was systematically introduced into these living subjects. The precise mechanisms varied. Some were injected directly, others infected through contaminated food or water, some exposed to aerosolized pathogens. The outcomes were consistently horrific. Most victims subjected to these engineered contagions without treatment perished within a month, their bodies meticulously dissected and analyzed by Ishii and his growing team of researchers. Zhongma Fortress thus became the silent, desolate birthplace of Unit 731's ghastly legacy, where human life was reduced to mere biological material, sacrificed on the altar of imperial ambition and scientific depravity. The horrors concealed within the desolate walls of Zhongma Fortress could not remain entirely hidden forever. One night, amidst the fury of a raging storm, a flicker of desperate hope ignited. A Chinese prisoner named Li, whose full name is lost to the obscurity of history, rallied a small group, orchestrating a daring escape attempt. Under the cover of the tumultuous weather, with torrential rain lashing down and the searchlights rendered useless by the gloom and chaos, they fashioned a human ladder, scaling the formidable walls in a desperate bid for freedom. It was a perilous, almost suicidal undertaking, fueled by an unimaginable will to survive. Tragically, the majority of the escapees, including Li, perished in the attempt, either gunned down by alert guards once the storm momentarily broke, or succumbing to the harsh Manchurian wilderness. Yet, a small, resilient band of 12 men, against all odds, managed to make it out alive. These survivors, carrying with them the indelible scars of their ordeal and the chilling truths of Zhongma, eventually found their way to local resistance groups. Their harrowing testimonies, whispered from the shadows, began to spread like a grim contagion, disseminating word of the unspeakable atrocities being committed within the fortress. In a frantic effort to erase the damning evidence of their crimes and to silence the growing rumors, the Japanese military command ordered Zhongma Fortress razed to the ground in 1935. Buildings were systematically dismantled, laboratories were burned to ash, and every trace of the heinous experiments was meticulously eradicated. It was an act of brutal expediency, designed to wipe the slate clean. However, the destruction of the fortress did not signify the end of the bioweapons program. Instead, much like a virulent pathogen, it merely mutated and expanded. The strategic value of such weapons, as articulated by Ishii, had by now been fully embraced by the highest echelons of the Japanese military. Emperor Hirohito himself, through official authorization, sanctioned the creation of a much broader and more sophisticated network of epidemic prevention units. This seemingly benevolent designation provided a convenient, innocent-sounding cover for the true nature of their work. These units were established not only across the vast expanse of Manchuria, but also extended their tendrils into other occupied territories across the Pacific. This expansion represented a significant escalation, signaling a deeper commitment to biological warfare as a core component of the imperial strategy. A new main complex, far larger and more ambitious than Zhongma, began to rise from the earth near the town of Pingfan, just south of Harbin. This colossal facility was a self-contained city of death, a chilling testament to systematic depravity. It comprised over 150 buildings, meticulously designed for every stage of their horrific enterprise, advanced laboratories for pathogen cultivation, extensive prison blocks for holding thousands of victims, specialized breeding houses for infected fleas and rats, vast administrative buildings, and even housing, schools, and theaters for the thousands of staff and their families. It was a complete ecosystem dedicated to scientific barbarity. A dedicated rail spur was constructed, serving as a silent artery to funnel in a continuous stream of new victims from across the entire occupied region, keeping the monstrous machinery well supplied with material. Within these new walls, a chilling semantic shift occurred. Prisoners were no longer referred to as individuals, or even by derogatory terms, but were simply designated as logs, or maruta in Japanese, a dehumanizing term suggesting they were merely raw material to be processed. This deliberate manipulation of language served a crucial psychological purpose. It systematically stripped the victims of their humanity, making it easier for the perpetrators to view them as mere objects for experimentation rather than sentient beings capable of suffering. By 1941, Ishii's sprawling operation, now a fully mature and integrated component of the Imperial war machine, was officially christened Unit 731. This designation came with full Imperial approval, vast resources, and a staff numbering in the thousands. A chillingly efficient organization ready to unleash its invisible weapons upon a world already consumed by war. With the establishment of Unit 731 at Pingfan, the depravity of Ishii's program escalated to an unprecedented scale, pushing the boundaries of scientific horror far beyond the confines of laboratory walls. The meticulously engineered pathogens, cultivated with chilling precision, were no longer solely tested on shackled prisoners within the fortress. The experiments moved outwards, into the vast living canvas of occupied China, transforming entire cities and villages into unwitting, silent testing grounds. One of the most insidious methods involved tying prisoners to stakes in open fields, then dropping bombs and spraying aerosols directly onto their exposed bodies, releasing plague-infected fleas or aerosolized bacteria. This allowed the researchers to observe, with cold scientific detachment, the rate of infection, the spread of the disease under natural conditions, and the devastating efficacy of their delivery methods. These were not theoretical exercises. These were deliberate acts of murder, designed to refine the art of biological warfare. The reach of Unit 731's invisible terror extended far beyond these immediate victims. Plague-infected fleas, meticulously bred and enhanced, were dropped from low-flying aircraft over densely populated Chinese cities such as Ningbo. The results were catastrophic waves of bubonic plague swept through these communities, igniting epidemics that burned through homes and families, claiming tens of thousands of lives in agonizing suffering. Entire populations were decimated, their resistance futile against an unseen enemy engineered with malevolent intent. The tactics diversified, becoming ever more perfidious. Wells, the lifeblood of communities, were deliberately poisoned with cholera and typhoid bacteria, turning essential water sources into conduits of widespread sickness and death. Even more chilling were the vaccination campaigns organized by Japanese forces, ostensibly benevolent medical interventions. In reality, these were cruel deceptions, designed to secretly inject live bacteria into unsuspecting civilians, initiating further controlled outbreaks for observation. Children, with their vulnerable immune systems and their innate tendency to spread illness, were often given infected food, ensuring that diseases would disseminate naturally and efficiently through their families and entire villages, creating horrifyingly precise epidemiological studies on a massive human scale. The relentless scientific pursuit at Pingfan led to the engineering of modified strains of diseases that boasted an astonishing and utterly terrifying 99% mortality rate. These were not natural pathogens. These were weaponized diseases, meticulously designed to be deadlier and more virulent than anything found in nature. Pushing the boundaries of biological destruction, the geographical scope of these operations expanded relentlessly. From Pingfan, The invisible attacks fanned out across a vast swath of China, encompassing cities and regions like Changchun, Kuzhou, Yiwu, Chengde, and Yunnan. Hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians perished in wave after wave of these invisible, silent attacks. The full extent of the death toll, even today, remains difficult to precisely quantify. But estimates suggest a staggering loss of life, a testament to the sheer scale and brutality of Unit 731's offensive. Beyond the Chinese population, Unit 731 also extended its cruel research to Allied prisoners of war. Americans, British, Soviets, and other captured soldiers became unwilling data points, subjected to the same horrific experiments. Their suffering, meticulously recorded, contributed to ISHI's growing repository of knowledge on how to weaponize disease effectively against different human populations. Even Japanese troops were not entirely immune to the consequences of this barbarity. In one tragic instance, over 1,700 Japanese soldiers were accidentally infected during a field campaign involving Unit 731's pathogens. For Ishii, this was simply another data set, another grim entry in his ledger, illustrating the unpredictable and devastating power of the weapons he had unleashed. The sheer indifference to life, both enemy and even his own, underscored the profound moral emptiness at the heart of his scientific endeavor. By the summer of 1945, the tide of World War II had irrevocably turned against Japan. The Axis alliance was crumbling, with Nazi Germany having already collapsed in May. In the Pacific, U.S. forces were closing in relentlessly, island by island, pushing ever closer to the Japanese home islands. Concurrently, a new and formidable threat emerged from the north, the Soviet Union, finally declaring war on Japan, launched a massive invasion of Manchuria, where the heart of Unit 731's operations was situated. The war for Japan was rapidly drawing to its devastating conclusion. Faced with imminent defeat and the prospect of the facilities falling into enemy hands, Shiro Ishii issued a chilling final order. Pingfan and all other Unit 731 installations across Manchuria were to be utterly destroyed. It was a frantic, desperate effort to erase the monstrous evidence of their crimes. Laboratories, filled with cultures of deadly pathogens, were burned to the ground. Meticulously kept records, detailing years of human experimentation, were shredded, pulverized, and incinerated. Every possible trace of their unspeakable activities was to vanish into smoke and ash. But the cover-up extended far beyond mere buildings and documents. The most damning evidence, the living witnesses to Pingfan's inner workings, had to be silenced permanently. Prisoners, and even many of the Chinese laborers who had unknowingly assisted in the construction and maintenance of the facility, were systematically injected with cyanide. It was a mass execution, cold and calculated, ensuring that no living soul could bear witness to the true scale of the horrors committed within those walls. Even in the chaos of retreat, some of Unit 731's units, in a final act of biological terrorism, released infected horses, rats, and fleas into the landscape, seeding new outbreaks of disease as they fled, leaving a legacy of sickness and death in their wake. The full human cost of Unit 731's operations is almost beyond comprehension. While precise figures remain elusive, estimates of deaths directly attributable to their experiments exceed 500,000. This horrific total includes tens of thousands who perished in direct, agonizing experiments within the camps. and hundreds of thousands more who succumbed to the widespread epidemics intentionally unleashed as biological weapons across China. It stands as one of the darkest chapters in modern military history. After Japan's unconditional surrender in August 1945, the Allied powers began to piece together the fragments of this hidden atrocity. The United States, in particular, was already aware of Japan's biological warfare program. Reports from intelligence agencies, the harrowing testimonies of Allied POWs who had endured their own experiences with Japanese medical units, and earlier, covert investigations had provided glimpses into the chilling reality. A planned U.S. raid, codenamed Operation Flamingo, designed to seize critical data and rescue any remaining prisoners near Harbin, was tragically never launched, as the swift advance of Soviet forces meant they reached the facilities first. In the aftermath of the surrender, as occupying forces took control of Japan, a pivotal, morally fraught negotiation began. Unit 731 officers, recognizing the precariousness of their position, initiated contact with American authorities through intermediaries like Dr. Ryoichi Naito. Their offer was stark, yet incredibly tempting to the U.S. military scientific establishment. They would surrender their full body of research, their meticulous records of human experimentation, their knowledge of weaponized pathogens, in exchange for complete immunity from prosecution for war crimes. It was a deal with the devil, laid bare on the table of a shattered world. In the aftermath of a war that had shaken the world to its core, General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander for the Allied powers in occupied Japan, along with other high-ranking U.S. authorities, faced a profoundly complex and ethically challenging decision. The intelligence they had gathered, coupled with the explicit offer from Unit 731 scientists, presented them with a stark choice. The data obtained from years of human experimentation, the meticulous records on the effects of plague, anthrax, cholera, and other deadly pathogens on living human bodies, was deemed too valuable to fall into the hands of other emerging powers, particularly the Soviet Union, or simply to be lost to history. The scientific insights, however gained, were seen as a strategic advantage in the nascent Cold War era. And so, a dark bargain was struck. As the Tokyo war crimes trials commenced, prosecutors were carefully instructed to avoid any mention of biological warfare. The judges, many of whom were unaware of the full scope of Unit 731's activities, were either misled or kept entirely ignorant of this horrific chapter. The vast network of depravity, the hundreds of thousands of lives lost, the systematic dehumanization, all were deliberately scrubbed from the official narrative of justice. In 1948, the terms of the clandestine agreement were quietly fulfilled. Japanese scientists associated with Unit 731 were granted immunity from prosecution for their war crimes. Shiro Ishii, the architect of this monstrous enterprise, escaped trial entirely. He retired quietly to Chiba Prefecture, a figure unseen and unpunished by the world's official justice systems. He lived a life of relative comfort, far from the prison cells and gallows that awaited so many others who had committed far lesser atrocities. It is reported that he maintained a degree of leverage over his American benefactors, only handing over approximately 80% of his invaluable, blood-soaked data, keeping some secrets as a safeguard for his continued immunity. In 1959, Shiro Ishii died of throat cancer in Tokyo. His passing was marked by no public condemnation, no forced reckoning for his crimes. Near the end of his life, he reportedly engaged in self-experiments, perhaps a final, macabre act of scientific curiosity. He also underwent a late conversion to Catholicism, an attempt, perhaps, at spiritual absolution for a lifetime of unrepentant horror. He faced no prison sentence, no gallows. His scientific genius never truly held accountable for its profound lack of conscience. For decades following the war, the Western public largely remained unaware of his name or the full extent of Unit 731's atrocities. While Soviet and Chinese accusations of a U.S. cover-up occasionally surfaced, they were systematically dismissed by Western media and governments as communist propaganda, serving to further obscure the truth. The official silence was profound, allowing the dark legacy to fester beneath the surface of accepted history. It was not until the 1980s, driven by the tireless efforts of survivors, the courageous testimonies of former staff members, and the slow, painstaking uncovering of archival documents, that Unit 731 finally began to be dragged into public view. The true scale of the crimes, the systematic nature of the human experimentation, and the shocking extent of the subsequent cover-up, both Japanese and American, slowly became undeniable. Even today, the biological shadow of Ishii's work lingers. Scientists speculate that plagues and diseases evolved from the strains he unleashed might still echo through certain regions, a quiet, insidious reminder of his cruelty. Shiro Ishii's legacy thus sits in the dark, often avoided corners of World War II history. His story is a chilling narrative of genius without conscience, of science divorced from its soul, and of justice deliberately denied for reasons of perceived national interest. It stands as a stark, whispered warning from the past, a quiet testament to the enduring human capacity for both intellectual brilliance and unimaginable depravity, and the tragic consequences when one is pursued without the guiding light of the other.